What if I told you the most notorious gangster in American history was not really a gangster at all? At least, not in the way you think. He was something far more sophisticated, far more influential, and frankly, far more dangerous. A brilliant CEO who stumbled upon a billion-dollar market loophole created by, of all people, the United States government itself. This is the story of how a misguided law turned a common criminal into a corporate titan and revealed a timeless economic truth that is still making people rich today. Forget the Tommy guns and the fedoras for a moment. To understand Al Capone, you must first understand the single greatest gift he ever received: Prohibition. In 1920, with the passing of the 18th Amendment, the federal government embarked on a grand social experiment. They had a truly brilliant idea, one born from a potent cocktail of moral righteousness and political convenience. They decided they could cure society of its ills, crime, poverty, you name it, by simply taking away everyone's booze. It was a noble crusade, they promised, that would usher in an era of clean living and prosperity. As it turns out, legislating human nature is a tricky business, and their economic foresight was, to put it mildly, lacking. They made one critical miscalculation. While the law could ban the supply of alcohol, it could not erase the demand. In fact, by making it forbidden, they only made it more desirable. Suddenly, a simple glass of beer was an act of rebellion. A cocktail party was a clandestine meeting. The government did not eliminate the market for alcohol. They perfected it. They erased all legal competition, created artificial scarcity, and drove prices through the roof, effectively handing the keys to a multi-billion-dollar industry to anyone with the guts, the organization, and the ruthlessness to seize it. It was the business opportunity of a lifetime. Enter Alphonse Capone, born to poor Italian immigrants in the rough-and-tumble world of Brooklyn in 1899. He was no stranger to the criminal underworld by the time he reached his early 20s. But when he moved to Chicago, he did not just find a new city. He found the epicenter of an economic gold rush. Prohibition-era Chicago was the Silicon Valley of vice, and liquor was the new oil. Capone, with his sharp mind for logistics and a complete lack of moral inhibition, was perfectly positioned to become its undisputed king. Do not picture some ragtag crew selling moonshine from the trunk of a car. Capone's operation, known as the Chicago Outfit, was a masterclass in vertical integration that would make any Fortune 500 CEO weep with envy. He controlled the entire supply chain, from the breweries and illegal distilleries operating in plain sight to the fleets of trucks and secret import routes smuggling premium Canadian whiskey across the border. His product then flowed seamlessly into a sprawling distribution network of thousands of speakeasies, those hidden bars masquerading as barbershops, florists, and funeral homes, all paying him a handsome fee for protection and a guaranteed supply. At its peak, this enterprise was estimated to be raking in an astonishing $100 million a year. In today's money, that is roughly $1.5 billion. Tax-free, of course. Making $1 billion illegally is one thing. Keeping it is an entirely different challenge. Capone's true genius was not just in selling whiskey, but in laundering the proceeds and buying something far more valuable: the law itself. He plowed his illicit profits into legitimate, cash-heavy businesses like laundromats, restaurants, and nightclubs, making it impossible to trace the money's origin. He turned the city of Chicago into a wholly owned subsidiary of his criminal enterprise. His payroll did not just include gangsters and enforcers. It included police officers, judges, prosecutors, and powerful politicians. Corruption was not a bug in his system. It was the operating system itself. In a city where half the population was technically breaking the law just by having a drink, Al Capone was not seen by everyone as an outlaw. To many, he was a provider of jobs, a patron of the community, and a folk hero who gave the people what they wanted when their own government refused. The key to his long-running success was not just brute force, though he was certainly not afraid to use it. Just ask the 7 members of a rival gang who were on the receiving end of his idea of a hostile takeover during the infamous St. Valentine's Day massacre. No, his true strength was in risk management. He understood the fundamental paradox of his business. The very law that made him rich was also his greatest vulnerability. The moment Prohibition was repealed, his astronomical profit margins would evaporate. So he diversified his portfolio, branching into gambling, prostitution, and other rackets. But alcohol always remained the crown jewel, simply because the economics were unbeatable. Think about it this way. Before Prohibition, alcohol was a cheap commodity. The government's ban transformed it into a luxury good. Every single step in the illegal supply chain added a hefty markup. You had to bribe the cops to look the other way. You had to pay truck drivers a premium for the risk. You had to hire armed guards to protect the shipments from other ambitious entrepreneurs. The price of a bottle of whiskey skyrocketed, and yet people happily paid. The demand was inelastic. Capone did not have to be a genius to see what the lawmakers in Washington could not. You do not stop a behavior by making it illegal. You simply industrialize the crime surrounding it. For years, Capone seemed untouchable. The federal government, led by determined agents like Eliot Ness and his untouchables, tried everything to dismantle his empire. They launched raids, wiretapped his operations, and tried to pin countless crimes on him. But his organization was a fortress, insulated by layers of bribery and loyalty. Yet, power that is built on a specific government policy is always vulnerable to a change in that policy. By the early 1930s, the political winds were shifting. The Great Depression was ravaging the country, and the government was desperate for cash. Suddenly, the idea of collecting billions in tax revenue from legal alcohol sales sounded a lot more appealing than the moral victory of a dry nation. Capone's downfall, when it finally came, was comically mundane. After all the violence, the turf wars, and the corruption, what brought down the most feared man in America was not a bullet, but a ledger. In 1931, the federal government finally convicted him on the one charge they could make stick: income tax evasion. They could not prove the murders, but they could prove he was living a life of luxury with no declared income. It was the ultimate irony. He was sent to federal prison, eventually ending up in Alcatraz for failing to pay taxes on money he had made illegally. 2 years later, in 1933, Prohibition was repealed. Just like that, with the stroke of a pen, the market that had built a billion-dollar criminal dynasty vanished overnight. Legal breweries and distilleries roared back to life. Prices returned to normal, and the black market for booze dried up. But do not make the mistake of thinking this story is just a historical curiosity. The economic blueprint that made Capone a king is more alive today than ever before. The names and the products have changed, but the game remains exactly the same. Look at the modern cannabis industry. For decades, it was a massive underground market, creating its own generation of Capones. Government enforcement did not stop it. It just ensured the profits went to criminals. Now, as state after state legalizes it, what is happening? The market is shifting from street corners to sleek, corporate-owned dispensaries. The profits are shifting from cartels to shareholders, and governments are finally collecting taxes. It is the prohibition cycle repeating itself, just with a different plant. Or consider the wild world of cryptocurrency. For years, it operated in a regulatory Wild West, a gray zone outside the control of traditional finance. The profits for early adopters were astronomical, precisely because the risk was high and the rules were undefined. Now, as governments around the world begin to regulate, what do we see? Big banks and institutional investors are moving in, the market is consolidating, and those insane early profit margins are shrinking. A new industry is being brought from the shadows into the light. The pattern is undeniable. When a government restricts or bans something people want, it does not eliminate the market. It just redirects the flow of money into the hands of those willing to operate outside the lines. So, what is the ultimate lesson from the rise and fall of Al Capone? It is not about crime. It is about the powerful intersection of law, economics, and human desire. His story teaches us that markets are never truly free. They are shaped by the rules, regulations, and restrictions that governments impose. Scarcity, whether it is natural or artificially created by a law, is what creates massive opportunity. Recognizing these government-made inefficiencies is how the smartest players get ahead. Finally, any fortune built entirely on exploiting a temporary legal loophole is itself temporary. Just as Prohibition ended, today's profitable regulations can change tomorrow. Capone's empire rose because he understood the economic environment of his time better than the government that created it. It fell because that environment changed, and he could not adapt. That fundamental truth applies to every entrepreneur, investor, and policymaker today. The cycle of policy, scarcity, and profit is constantly in motion. History is not just a collection of old stories. It is a playbook filled with the secrets to wealth and power. If you want to learn how to read it, make sure you subscribe. The answers are all there if you only know where to look.